Hi, I'm Bree Davies, and you're watching Sounds on 29. I'm here today with my friend Michelle Rocqet from the Milk Blossoms, as well as solo endeavors, which is what we're going to talk about today. Thanks for joining us. And Michelle, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yay!
Yay!
So I wanted to talk to you because I know in April you released a single of sorts, sort of a solo effort outside of the Milk Blossoms. And I don't know if I've heard your music outside of the Milk Blossoms. So what was what was the catalyst for you to do something sort of on your own outside of the band?
Yeah, this was my very first thing that I released outside. And I think as I've gotten older and as I have sort of figured out, and still I'm trying to figure out myself as an artist and as a person, as a human being, I think we all have multiple versions of ourselves that can be incorporated into a single individual identity. So like the Milk Blossoms is my ride or die. And we have this process, like a really heavy curation process as a group that is so beautiful and is something that I value so much. And this was, I think, also just a way to like help me strengthen my own personal individual voice in order to also bring it back a little bit stronger for the Milk Blossoms. So that's kind of was my thought process, and genre wise, it's a little bit outside of the Milk Blossoms. So it just was a grand experiment and in music and how it naturally wants to be in multitudes, you know?
Yeah, it turned out beautifully. The song is called Interview, and I think we can link to it later, but it is definitely different from what the Milk Blossoms, generally just sound is to me, but would you talk a little bit about the process for making this song, and if you collaborated or worked with anyone else, or sort of like how did the song itself come together?
I was in this relationship for a short period of time, and we had just gone to breakfast, and we kind of had to have some more difficult conversations about what we needed from one another. And I was just feeling sort of weird about it afterwards. So I ended up going into the studio to a place that I work called Youth on Record. And I ended up freestyling and singing over a 4-bar loop of guitar and drums for probably 10 minutes. And Kaylin Heffernan of Wiltshire Sports Camp was there engineering and helping me out. And after I had sort of freestyled all these things for 10 minutes, we cut it up and structured it. And pretty much everything lyrically and melodically is the same as that first take. And so what you hear on the single is what we did that first day in the studio. So I had a really rough demo of it, and then I took it to my friend Tyler Lindgren, who drums for a group called Holophrase, who's amazing, and he also is an amazing producer and engineer. And we've been friends forever. So I took it to him, and he helped me flesh it out a little bit with the production side, and we kind of co-produced it together. And then I got Felix Ayodele on there for keys and guitar, which is a dream come true. And then we just started to experiment in the production realm after that. And I think the process was really about, you have this like very simple feeling, and you're just trying to make it float the entire time. So anything that like took away from or like pulled too much focus from the feeling or kind of sunk it or kind of just like shifted it was something that we were actively just trying to make it float, you know? So that's kind of how that process was. And yeah, it started very like, it's weird for me to think that I freestyled those lyrics and then that's what's on there. Because has never really been my process before.
That's amazing. Is this track Interview, is it part of a larger, longer term project, a full album, an EP, or was it sort of just like an off the cuff piece that you put together?
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, it's not attached to any master plan. I just was like, oh, here's a single. I imagine that maybe as time goes by, I'll just kind of revisit it when I can. I hope to be able to release an EP or an album, but there's no plans for that right now. I'm just kind of, everything's sort of very organically happening, so.
Well, I hope that there is a full record in the process, because I love this song so much, and it is very different from what you do with the Milk Blossoms, and it's expansive in a different way. And I just appreciated so much I wanted more, because I got this little piece and I was like, oh wow, I've never heard Michelle in this sort of light. And I've heard you're such a prolific collaborator, even talking about this particular track, working with Felix and working with Tyler and Kaylin. But then also the sort of foundation that you create with Blair and Harmony is amazing. Speaking of, are the Milk Blossoms working on anything in particular right now in terms of like a new record? Or I think it's hard for a lot of folks in music right now, because this is the prime time when we would be going, like putting on shows and touring and such. So I just wondered if you all were working on anything at the moment.
Yeah, we've been, for a little while now, we have been working on writing and finishing our third record. We had tentative plans to record it in the fall, but with everything shifting and with things being a little uncertain, we're sort of just sitting and reflecting and taking the time to be very thoughtful, I think, about the next album. So in a way, it's a gift. In a way, it's definitely like a forced hiatus from playing shows. And I think that provides a little bit more space for us to consider the record in that way. I mean, everything that came before this was still something that we tried to put a lot of care and a lot of love and a lot of thought into. But that was also simultaneously while playing shows and working jobs and going to school and doing everything and trying to balance and kind of, there's that like stereotypical grind of being an artist. So for this one, I think just based off of what is happening in the world on so many different levels, it will be different because of that and because of this time. And I think that art will generally find a new sense of itself. I don't know, like there's a reason that it's difficult not to just like want to talk about what we're experiencing during quarantine and what we're experiencing in this new digital realm, and like what we as humans are looking for on a very basic level, like on a fundamental level. What do we need and what are we searching for? And we're searching for connectivity and for community and for art still. We're figuring it out in a digital realm, which has been really interesting to witness and also participate in sometimes.
I felt there was this momentum at first with quarantine, and that a lot of us were trying to produce or do something to keep that connection going. Partially, I think, out of the fact that we couldn't be together and be in rooms where we were performing, but partially out of just like that weird drive to be in the grind that we were no longer in, like you were kind of talking about. And now, as we're seeing with this larger rolling into from a public health crisis into addressing another public health crisis of police brutality and the movement for Black lives, I think you're absolutely right. Like, what is the artist's role going to be? What is it right now? What is it going to continue to be? I think a lot of people that we know, especially in Denver, because there's such a crossover, I think, between artists and I hesitate to use the word activism because I know a lot of folks don't identify with that, but at least community-oriented organizing. There's a lot of crossover there, and I'm curious and excited and want to support whatever that next step is for us as artists. But I can see where maybe if we were in the middle of something like making a record or planning a tour or something, it's all looking completely different now.
Music is still an industry, and in an industry, the goal is to make money. And I always sensed and was aware and knew how much capitalism was involved in the music industry. But I think I've really, really started to understand the relationship from myself to it, and the pressure that I have put on myself as an artist and as a person and even as an educator and I've bought into that because we've been taught our entire lives to believe this narrative that like we're never enough. And so I think that applies to why people in the beginning were like, oh, I need to now publish my entire opus and opera that I have been thinking about for 20 years, and I need to do it in the next 2 weeks. Like, we're so used to being measured by our productivity, and we're so used to being measured by what we put out and how much money we can make from it, that I hope people are realizing that your life is not valued by that solely, and your work is just an addition. It's additional value to what you bring to people's lives and like what value you have as an individual, but it's not your only measurement of value.
Yeah, watching that or feeling that need to produce, and understanding that that is part of capitalism, and then it's seeped into our art. And like you're saying, it's still an industry, and we're still dealing with the monetary side of it, and it's just not that easy to sort of take those two things apart. But I think you're right in slowing down and thinking about what you want out of it or what you want to put into the world is really important. To wrap up, where can folks find your music, both on your own and then with the Milk Blossoms?
Yeah, so you can find Interview on all streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, Amazon. Actually, don't go to Amazon. Deezer, probably. I don't know what that means. But anywhere you can stream music, you can find it. Also on Bandcamp. And same for the Milk Blossoms. You can find us at The Milk Blossoms on all streaming platforms and music places and social media. And we also have a website, themilkblossoms.com.
Awesome. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.